Chapter 2601. She didn't say anything. Zhou Chongwang smiled and still hugged her. You can't bear to part with me, can you? He thought that Qin Mu wouldn't answer him, but she did. Zhou Chongwang, yes, I can't bear to part with you, but, sometimes, it's better to miss each other than to see each other. She gently pushed him away. I've already crossed a lot today. I won't come here again. Perhaps it was too sudden, or perhaps it was because her mind was too soft, so she stepped back step by step. However, she didn't intend to step back anymore, because she wouldn't be Qin Mu anymore. Qin Mu wasn't a mistress, and she didn't want to be one of the women in his harem. She stepped back a little, and under his slightly pained gaze, she took the ring off her finger. I was wrong. The last obsession would only make them unable to let go of each other, which was shameful and immoral. She lowered her eyes. As for yours, if you're willing to wear it, I'm not qualified to say anything. Zhou Chongwang, we've said that we'll part on good terms. It's really meaningless like this. I know. He let out a heavy breath and let go of her. Then there was silence, an unbearable silence. After a long time, he said softly, Qin Mu, just think of it as a dream. Don't take it too seriously. However, he took it seriously. At that time, he was very intoxicated. He felt that they had returned to the past, so he kissed her and forced her to do that for him. Qin Mu looked at him and gave him a slight smile. Then, he got off the bed. She tidied herself up and turned her back to him. Zhou Chongwang, I'm leaving. There was no sound behind her. She walked towards the door, and with every step she took, her heart ached more. After all, she had loved him, and she had given her heart to him. She would still feel pain if she left. When she reached the door, he hugged her from behind. Just as she was about to speak, Zhou Chongwang's voice rang in her ears. Please, Mu, don't talk. Just let me hug you for a while, just for a while. Perhaps, this was the last time he would hold her like this. She was right. They had parted on good terms. He had no right to ask anything of her. What he had done to her today was truly evil. He had relied on the fact that she might still be sentimentally attached to him. But he hatefully took advantage of her attachment and did shameless things. Qin Mu didn't move. He hugged her with so much force that he almost crushed her bones. Every inch of his strength was filled with reluctance. But no matter how reluctant he was, he still let her go. He kissed her forehead and helped her tidy up her coat. Then he said in a hoarse voice, Qin Mu, be well. Find a good man to marry. Qin Mu's eyes widened slightly. She could hardly believe her ears. Because Zhou Chongwang had never been so generous before, but this was considered letting go. The highest realm of letting go was probably blessing. Zhou Chongwang smiled at her and said, Mu, be happy. If you're happy, I'm happy too. Do you know? He looked at her with a burning gaze, but it turned into the most powerful weapon. Qin Mu's eyes were stained with tears. She wanted to smile at him and tell him that she was very good, but she couldn't say a word, because what she thought was good was not good at all. It turned out that she still felt heartache when she looked at him. Chapter 2602. She suddenly couldn't take it anymore. She pushed him away and ran downstairs. This time, Zhou Chongwang didn't chase after her. Instead, he looked at her back until she couldn't be seen. Then, he looked down at her wedding ring on his finger. This pair of wedding rings had been with him for a very long time, every single day, every single moment. He felt that he loved her, but he still cared about his own comfort and made her cry. Zhou Chongwang looked down and smiled silently. It was a bitter smile. This time, he should really let go. Let go and let her be happy. He turned and went upstairs, quietly lying on the bed. There was still the faint scent of her body on it. It had been a long time since he had smelled this scent. He smelled it fondly, and later ordered the servants at home not to change the bed sheets. If he wanted to change it, he would change it next summer. Qin ran all the way downstairs and felt like she couldn't breathe. She stood there for a long time before she suddenly turned around and looked at the villa. This was the house that he had said he would give her. In the end, he had given her everything but this house. What was the point of keeping it? Was it hard to see it? Qin smiled, but her face was full of tears. At this moment, her phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and saw that it was Qin Chen. Qin Chen's voice was very leisurely. Qin, don't you want to come to New York for a vacation? Qin looked in the direction of the villa and smiled. Didn't you say that you were busy a while ago? Didn't you say that you did a great experiment and saved a puppy? No, it's a monkey. Qin Chen said seriously. Qin said helplessly, all right, it's a monkey. Is the monkey better? Yes, it can eat and sleep. It's quite cute. Don't you want to see it? Qin Chen invited her warmly, which was rare. Qin wanted to refuse, but after thinking about it, she agreed. Perhaps it was good to relax. She bit her lip and thought about it. Then I'll go next week. And I'll take you to New York for Christmas. It will be very exciting. Qin Chen smiled happily. Qin felt that she hadn't seen Qin Chen so happy for a long time, and she was happy for her. Qin Chen seemed to have changed over the years. He looked normal, but she could feel that he was unhappy. Behind his elegant and refined appearance, there was a mystery. As for the reason, no one dared to ask. Everyone had a wound that couldn't be touched, and that mystery was Qin Chen's. Qin hung up the phone and walked to her car slowly. When she started the car, she was in a much better mood. It was probably because of Qin Chen's call and the vacation that she had received. She told herself that she should give herself a long vacation and leave B City. When she came back, she might feel much better. With a faint smile, he started the car and left. But she didn't notice that soon after she left, a red sports car slowly drove over from the other side. Gu Mei's face flashed through the car window. She wore a pair of sunglasses on her palm-sized face. When she flashed past, she saw Zhou Chongguang's sports car parked in the villa. Sure enough, he still missed this place. Lin Shui and those women were just comforts. The one he didn't forget was still Qin. But why did Qin appear here? It seemed that she didn't have an appointment with Zhou Chongguang. Because Gu Mei knew Qin's character very well, such a proud person was unlikely to be entangled with Zhou Chongguang after the divorce. So, was it a coincidence? Chapter 2603. From that day on, Qin did not go to that villa again. In fact, she had only been there once since the divorce. But it was this time that she met Zhou Chongguang. From that day on, she did not see him for a few days. She deliberately did not hear any news about him, but his scandals were still spreading all over the place. At this moment, she was in the art gallery with her sister-in-law, Cher, standing next to her. Cher stood side by side with her, discussing what kind of paintings they should hang here. Cher suddenly turned her head and looked at Qin. Have you seen the news about Zhou Chongguang these days? Qin was stunned for a moment and looked away. No. Cher patted her on the shoulder. If you let it go, this news will be very satisfying for you. Qin looked at her, not understanding what she meant. Just 2 days ago, there was a civil war in Zhou Chongguang's harem. Cher coughed. It seems that a model was injured by Lin Shui's bodyguard. Lin Shui was a smart woman. She knew how to protect herself on the way to the top. She even hired bodyguards. They were supposed to protect Gu Mei, but they were used on other mistresses instead. Cher sighed. It was a fierce scene. The main thing is that Zhou Chongwang and Gu Mei are not in a good relationship and can divorce at any time. That's why other women have thoughts about him. She looked at Qin Mu and coughed. Why do I feel that Lin Shui is the most likely person? Qin Mu laughed. Cher, don't provoke me. It's impossible between him and me. She paused. Besides, he is so messed up now. It's disgusting to think about it. She stuck her tongue out at Shui. Only in front of Shui could she joke like this. The thing about Zhou Chongwang was indeed a terrible thing in Qin Mu's life. Similarly, only Cher dared to talk to her about Zhou Chongwang. Actually, there was nothing that she couldn't say here. Although it was painful, it was over. She was not the weak Qin Mu. Cher looked at her and smiled. Then she hooked her arm and rested her face on Qin Mu's shoulder. Mu, I heard that you're going to New York. Qin Mu looked at the little head on her shoulder and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Really, Cher is older than me by 4 years. She's not young anymore. She'll be 28 this year, right? But Cher has always been thin and small. She's about 160 centimeters tall and looks very girlish. She always looks like she's in her 20s. She can even act coquettishly in front of me, and I can't do anything about it. Will my brother be jealous when he sees you like this? Qin Mu smiled and then ruffled Cher's hair. Cher smiled. If I lean on Qin Chen's shoulder like this, your brother will probably want to kill me. Although Qin Chen was a girl, she looked like a man. Yi Muyun never allowed her to get close to him, but every time Qin Chen saw her, he would hug her. He liked to see his brother angry and crazy. Because it was rare. Cher smiled and thought of Yi Muyun's brothers and sisters. Then she stretched and said in a delicate voice, Mu, as your sister-in-law, I'll take good care of you. Qin Mu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Forget it. It's us who will take care of you. Cher looked at her and said, I'll lose face if you say that. Chapter 2604. Qin Mu patted the little Cher next to her and said, Well, go and ask my brother if you have any shame. You are fighting with your own daughter and son for favor. Don't you feel ashamed? Cher stuck out her tongue and said, I'm older. They should give in to me. Qin Mu had never seen such a righteous mother, but it was also because her brother spoiled her. Speaking of Cher and the 2 children, her brother really doted on Cher a little more. Qin Mu thought darkly in her heart that it was because Cher could play adult games with him. Her brother was also kind of like that. Yi Muyun walked in and just hooked his hand, and his little one ran over. He took her into his arms and smiled at Qin Mu. I'm going to have dinner with Cher later. Do you want to join us? Qin Mu crossed her arms in front of her and smiled. Forget it. It's rare for you to have some alone time. Just thinking about the 2 little ones at home gave her a headache. Yi Muyun looked serious. Qin Mu had said what was on his mind. In the past, he'd really liked children, especially Cher's. Every single one of them resembled her. But now, how he missed the time when he didn't have children. Yi Muyun took Cher away and decided to go to the presidential suite of the GM Hotel as soon as possible after dinner. After that, he would go home to nurse the children. Just thinking about it made him cry bitterly. Qin Mu watched them leave and smiled. She also packed up her things and was ready to get off work. It was cold, and she wanted to eat hot pot. After thinking about it, she called He Huan and asked her to eat with her. She also asked her brother, Qin Mo, what He Huan thought. After the phone call, she got off work in a good mood and drove to the good vegetarian hotpot restaurant. Chin-moo went there almost once a week. After driving for about half an hour, her car stopped at a red light and couldn't start again. Chin-moo tried a few times, but to no avail. In the end, she could only get out of the car and open the front cover to check. She didn't know much about it to begin with, so she couldn't find anything after looking at it for a long time. So she got into the car and tried again, but to no avail. Just as she got out of the car again, a deep male voice sounded beside her. The car broke down. Lin Sanju was lying on the hood of the car to look at the car. When she heard the voice, she immediately raised her head. However, the moment she raised her head, she bumped into the person's chin. They both groaned at the same time. Chin-moo covered her head and looked at the man in front of her with tears in her eyes. It was Gu-zae. The way she looked at him was not friendly. Gu-zae found it both funny and infuriating. Her hostility was too inexplicable. He asked again. The car broke down. It's none of your business. Her voice was unfriendly, and then she lay down and pretended to examine him. Gu-zae didn't ignore her because of her coldness. He stood by the side and watched. Suddenly, he opened her car door and sat inside. Chin-moo immediately straightened up and ran over. What are you doing? Gu-zae was sitting in the car. The door was open. When she leaned over, he grabbed her slender arm and dragged her in. Chin-moo screamed and then sat on his lap. She was about to struggle when she felt a hidden force. She was married, so she naturally didn't dare to move. She just said in a mess, Gu-zae, let go of me, or I'll scream. Scream. People will think that we're quarreling. He said indifferently, if you scream, I'll kiss you immediately. Chapter 2605. Gu-zae chuckled. How can there be such a stupid person? Don't you know that the car is running out of gas? Chin-moo widened her eyes and looked over. It seemed that the car was running out of gas. She was a little embarrassed and said after a while, then put me down. I have to make a call. Gu-zae didn't let go of her. He held her waist with one hand and dialed a number with the other. When he spoke, his voice was elegant and pleasant. The car door wasn't closed. Everyone in the car saw her sitting on him. He didn't care. She still wanted to save her face, and she didn't want to be in the news for her ex-husband to see. She had no choice but to climb to the front passenger seat. This time, he didn't stop her. After the call, he put away the phone. Where are you going? I'll give you a ride. Chin-moo ignored him and didn't move. I don't need you to care about me. Gu-zae, did you hear that? It seems that you are very guarded against me. He looked at her. Do you think that I want to chase you? Chin-moo didn't say anything because she knew that these men who did well in the business world were all bad. Her brother was like that, so was Zhou Chongwang. Naturally, Gu-zae wasn't bad either. She didn't say anything, but he chuckled. You're right. But I might not chase you. I might force you. As he said that, he grabbed her arm. If you don't want people to watch, take your bag and get out of the car with me. Chin-moo was furious. At that moment, she really wanted to scream on the road. So what if she was embarrassed? She didn't want to have anything to do with Gu-mei's brother, but he seemed to be passionate about it. In the end, for the sake of the gallery's reputation, she swallowed her anger. She got into the car with him and told him the location of the vegetarian restaurant. When Gu-zae started the car, he held his chin and smiled. I haven't had dinner yet. You don't mind, right? He added, it's my treat. No need. Chin-moo's voice was a little faint. Then, she looked at him and said unbearably, Gu-zae, you used to be pretty good. Really, keep it up. Guze's eyes darkened, and his voice became colder. Is it because I didn't pester you before? She didn't say anything, which was a tacit agreement. Guze lit a cigarette. After taking a drag, he said indifferently, "You used to be Mrs. Zhou. How could I pester you?" Her heart skipped a beat. She turned to look at him. Guze, I'm not Mrs. Zhou. It's impossible between us. You know that. Yes, I'm Gu Mei's brother. He said in a self-deprecating manner, then stopped at a red light. Qin Mu, I can guarantee that you will not see Gu Mei, not even once. I won't make things difficult for you. He held the cigarette and said bitterly, as long as you're willing, I can give you everything. What Zhou Chongguang has given you, and what he can't give you, I can give it all. She didn't know how torturous it was to secretly observe someone in the dark. From shameful to accepting, to hopeless to seeing a glimmer of hope, that kind of change in state of mind was so torturous. He used to think that they couldn't be together because he was Gu Mei's brother. But life was a lifetime. If he gave up for this, he would feel sorry for the 8 years of love. Qin Mu's heart raced. After a long time, she closed her eyes. Guze, don't force me. Chapter 2606. Guze pursed his lips and still looked at her. After looking at her for a long time, he said with a faint smile, "Okay, I won't force you." He continued to drive, but the speed was a little slow. It was so slow that Qin Mu couldn't ignore it. She looked at him and said, "Can you drive faster?" Guze's eyes still fell on the position in front of him. He smiled faintly and said, "As long as I can make it, it's fine, isn't it?" Qin Mu was so angry that she didn't want to talk to him. She turned her head away and didn't speak. Guze smiled slightly and then didn't say much. He even turned on the car stereo, which was a new song by the rain god. As he drove, he seemed to be a little absorbed in the song and even forgot her feelings. But Qin Mu knew in her heart that how could he forget? She also stubbornly stopped talking. Just like that, she drove in silence and encountered a rush-hour traffic jam. Qin Mu was furious. She stared at him and said, "Guze, did you do it on purpose?" There was a very charming smile on his lips. "I can't control the traffic jam. But you should have driven faster just now." She accused him of his mistake. Guze paused for a moment, looked at her sideways, and smiled. "It's hard for me to concentrate when you're sitting next to me. It'll be dangerous if I drive fast." Qin Mu wanted to ask about his family, but now she was in his car, so she had to hold it back. At this time, Huan called and asked her softly if she had arrived. Qin Mu raised her hand and looked at her watch, only to find that it was almost 6:30 p.m. She had an appointment with Huan at 6:30 p.m. "Mu, I'm already here." Huan said happily, "Then I'll order first." "I'll wait for you." Qin Mu nodded and said gently, "If I'm late, you can eat first." Qin Mu had always treated Huan as a child. Huan was as tall as Cher and her mother, Su Qing. She was a petite beauty, so Qin Mu loved her dearly. Huan nodded and then told her pitifully, "I didn't bring my wallet. I wanted to eat yours. Mu, if you hadn't come, I might have been left to wash the dishes." Qin Mu smiled. "Okay." She put away the phone and looked at the long traffic jam in front of her. She was a little worried. When will this be over? "Guze, do you have any other shortcuts?" Guze bent one arm and rested it on the side of the car window. "Even if I do, I can't move it." Qin Mu looked through the rearview mirror and saw that the back was also packed to the brim. Her little face was slightly furrowed. "Can we still move?" She even had the urge to get off the car. However, as soon as this urge arose, Guzé said calmly, "You didn't take off your coat." Qin glared at him. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Guzé showed a charming smile again and said lazily, "Why should I say so earlier?" "Qin, if you're so sincere when chasing a girl, will you still succeed?" Qin snorted. "You won't succeed even if you do that." "At least I tried." He smiled, then reached into the locker and took out a piece of chocolate for her. "Eat some, and you'll be fine soon." Qin looked at the chocolate in his hand and raised her eyes. "Do you usually use it to coax girls?" "I do occasionally, but I've never met a girl I want to coax." He smiled, opened it for her, and put it in her palm. Chapter 2607. However, Qin felt that there was a deeper meaning behind his words. He explained it calmly and even confessed. She was a little surprised, but then she felt a little flattered. Qin didn't have the princess syndrome. She didn't think that it was natural for a man to love her unconditionally for 8 years. Moreover, it was a man as outstanding as Guzé. She knew that as long as he was willing, he could find a dozen women who were as good-looking as her and had a good family background. Especially, unmarried women. There was no need for him to be entangled with a divorced woman. She took small bites of the chocolate and stopped talking. Anything she said would be wrong and dangerous. Guzé naturally felt the change in her emotions. He didn't say anything and just rolled up the car window silently. There was a faint smell of chocolate in the car. It was sweet, and the girl who ate chocolate was still sitting beside him beautifully after everything. Guzé's lips couldn't help but curl up slightly. It was good enough just like that. His gaze landed on a milk tea shop by the roadside and he made a call. Thus, after Qin finished a small piece of chocolate, the car window slid open. A girl in work attire passed the milk tea in with a sweet smile. Guzé paid for it. When the car window closed again, he passed the milk tea to Qin. "Have some hot tea." Qin rejected it. "I won't drink it, I'll get fat." He looked at her and smiled faintly. "There's going to be another 2 hours of traffic here. Are you sure you don't want to drink it?" Qin eyes widened slightly. She leaned her head forward and her brown hair bounced naturally on her shoulders, looking very beautiful. She was a little conflicted. She wanted to get out of the car, but the thought of the cold wind outside made her shrink back. Drinking a cup of milk tea in the car should be much better. In the end, she gave in to the warmth of reality and held a cup of cappuccino in her hands, sipping it happily. Guzé looked at her calmly. Qin drank half of it and said softly, "Guzé, can you look away? The scenery outside is pretty good." He smiled and put his hands in front of him. He looked at the car outside and then at her. Then he let her stay there to wash the dishes. He raised his hand and looked at his watch. "It's past 7 o'clock now. She's probably done eating." Qin was shocked. She immediately took out her phone and found that it was out of battery. "My secretary lives nearby. I'll let her deal with it." Guzé saw her embarrassment and smiled. Qin combed her hair and smiled awkwardly. "Thank you. I'll give her a present one day." "The person you should thank the most is her boss, huh?" Guzé chuckled after the call. Qin secretly rolled her eyes and then looked to the other side. "If you hadn't driven so slowly, I wouldn't have been stuck in traffic. If you weren't by my side, I wouldn't have driven so slowly. Moo, in the end, it's still your fault." He naturally called her name. Although it was intimate, it didn't make people feel awkward. Qin turned her head to look at him. His gaze was warm and certain. It was the kind of gaze that was determined to get what he wanted, and it was the kind of gaze that was appropriate. Qin found that he was different from before, but she couldn't tell what was different. She felt a little uncomfortable and coughed. Oh. Chapter 2608. Since he said so, Qin said straightforwardly, then you can convert it into money and I'll transfer it to you. Then wouldn't it be better if you treated me to dinner? I'm hungry. Qin looked ahead. It's very late now. That vegetarian restaurant doesn't close until 10, he said naturally. Qin was a little surprised. Do you eat there often? He didn't say anything. He didn't intend to tell her that he had followed her in his car several times. She would know after going there many times. After Qin asked, he didn't answer. She felt a little bored and put down the milk tea. I'm not drinking anymore. Guzhe raised his eyebrows. This is for me. No. Before she could finish, he had already picked it up and drank the remaining half of the cup. A man drank milk tea, and it was her leftover milk tea, but Guzhe drank it calmly and didn't look feminine at all. After drinking it, he threw it into the small trash can and smiled. It's quite sweet. Qin. Other than blushing, she couldn't have any other reaction. Guzhe looked at her blushing face and smiled. His eyes fell on the straw again. If she wasn't here at this time, he would definitely pick it up and swallow the last mouthful. But thinking about it, he felt a little perverted. Just like that. The rain god's music was still playing in the car. Probably because of the appeal of the rain god, it actually rained at night in B City. It was dark outside, and only the rain looked clear in the dark night. And Guzhe's car moved very slowly. When they passed the peak of the traffic, it was almost 9 o'clock. Guzhe's car was parked in the parking lot. He threw his coat to Qin. Put it on. I'll get the umbrella from the trunk first. You wait in the car for a while. Qin refused. You put the coat on. He looked at her and smiled. Be obedient. When he said these two words, Qin was a little stunned. Be obedient. It seemed like a long time ago, someone used to coax her like this when she was disobedient. Guzhe seemed to have realized it. He smiled and ruffled her hair. Qin forced a smile and looked at him. In that kind of gaze, they knew what each other was thinking. In the end, he still got out of the car and quickly walked to the back to get the umbrella. Then, he ran over to open the car door for her. When Qin got under the umbrella, he held her arm. The umbrella wasn't big, so it was a little cramped, so they seemed to be hugging each other. The scene of a handsome man and a beautiful woman on a rainy winter night was indeed very pleasing to the eye. However, no matter how pleasing to the eye, it was not as hot as the scene of them kissing in a car. In the opposite car, the lights were on. The man and woman inside were hugging and kissing unscrupulously. The kiss was very deep and beautiful. The man and the woman, black and white, revealed endless tension. And what made Qin unable to move her eyes away was that the man in the car was Zhou Chongwang. In his arms was a young girl who had just debuted. Qin remembered that she had shot a commercial, which was quite refreshing. The most important thing was that the girl was only 18 years old. At the age of 18, she was entangled with a married and successful man in his late 30s. Qin sneered. She didn't know whether to laugh at the woman, herself, or Zhou Chongwang. Chapter 2609. Of course, he saw the man's clothes on her and Guzhe standing next to her. Were they together? And Qin also saw that his lips were covered with a woman's lipstick mark, which made him look very slutty. Their eyes met. Separated by a layer of car glass in the rain and the dark night, it was quiet, very quiet. The world seemed to have stopped, and the people coming and going seemed to have disappeared, A drop of tear from the corner of Qin Mu's eye corroded Zhou Chongwang's heart. It was numb and painful. The 18-year-old girl hugged him again, gave him her rosy and fresh lips, and kissed him passionately. He didn't reject, nor did he react. His gaze was still fixed on Qin Mu, staring straight at him. And Qin Mu suddenly found that the girl looked a little like her. Perhaps Lin Shui and the other women were just smoke bombs, and he was the one who made Gu Mei angry, but he might really get this girl into bed. Qin Mu smiled, then clasped her fingers on Gu Zei's arm and said softly, "Let's go in." His answer was to put his arm around her shoulder, pull her into his arms, and kiss her hair. Okay. It was still raining. The drizzle was like silk, but also like a knife, stabbing into Zhou Chongwang's heart. He suddenly pushed the woman away and quickly opened the door to get out of the car. Wearing only a black shirt, he stood in the rainy winter night and kept looking at the door of the restaurant, as if he felt that she could come out at any time, go to his car door, open the door, and slap him in the face. The 18-year-old girl in the car also got out of the car. She was only wearing a dress, and her body was shivering. She hugged Zhou Chongwang and murmured, "Zhou Zong." She kissed his chin again, but Zhou Chongwang pushed her away. His tone was a little cold. "I hate it when women play tricks on me." In the restaurant, the wine he drank was probably mixed with something. It was not strong, but it added to the fun. In addition, the woman looked a bit like Mumu, so he was confused for a moment. If Qin Mu hadn't appeared, he would probably have sex with this woman in the car, because he had mistaken her for someone else. The cold rain hit his face and body, which made him sober a lot. The little girl named Kiki was about to cry. She bit her lip and said, "Zhou Zong, I didn't do it on purpose." She knew that Zhou Zong couldn't forget his ex-wife, and Zhou Zong didn't eat with her. She wanted to be famous like crazy. She wanted to be famous like crazy. Her brother had to go to school, and her mother had to be treated. She had no choice. Moreover, Zhou Zong was very handsome and charming. She didn't want to give her body to those old men. Of his body was better than hers. One of her sisters gave her an idea, and it took Kiki a long time to decide to do so. Of course, she was no stranger to men. She was not a virgin, but she hadn't been with many men, so she was still clean. She thought that even if she couldn't make it right, it was enough for Zhou Zong to support her. Zhou Chongwang stood in the rainy night, while Kiki cried miserably. As she spoke, she really cried, because she was really miserable. Her first time was taken away by the boss of her agency. He was a fat man who weighed 180 kilograms. He was old and ugly. Even now, she wanted to vomit when she thought of it. Later, she had been with 2 or 3 men one after another, and she didn't have any impression of them. Chapter 26:10. She would have succeeded if she hadn't met his ex-wife. Kiki was only 18 years old, but she wasn't stupid. Zhou Chongwang picked her purely because of her face. Now that she had angered him, she was afraid that he would shut her out and kill her. Hence, she could only confess. After a long time, Zhou Chongwang finally lowered his head and looked at the girl who was crying miserably. "Forget it, don't do it again." He paused for a moment. "If there's a next time, I'll destroy your face." Kiki cried. "I won't dare. Zhou Zong, please forgive me. Get $1 million from my secretary tomorrow, be it for your father's treatment or your sister's schooling." "It's my mother's treatment and my brother's schooling." Kiki corrected him softly. But Zhou Chongwang didn't care about that. He was distraught. "Get lost now. If I want to have a meal with you, I'll get my secretary to contact you." Chi-Chi bit her lips and hummed in acknowledgement. She knew very well in her heart that she was truly just a substitute for him. Only when he looked at her face would he occasionally reveal a smile. But she also knew that she was just a facade. His ex-wife was really beautiful, completely different from her family background. She had a great temperament, and even if she were to wear a man's coat, it would still make one's heart ache. Kiki suddenly knew why he was in such a bad mood. It was probably because his ex-wife ran away with someone else. Kiki suddenly felt that she wasn't that pitiful. Zhou Zong, who had grass planted on his head, was the one who was pitiful. She whispered again to express her loyalty. Zhou Zong, don't worry. I won't do something like this again. She hurriedly said, I can also go for plastic surgery to look more like you. That way, CEO Zhou will be more comfortable and satisfied. Zhou Chongwang glanced at her. Even if you're wearing her skin, you're not her. Kiki shrank back a little, then ran to the side of the car and took out her small bag, as well as a cheap fake fur coat. She ran a few steps and turned back. Goodbye, Zhou Zong. You're such a good person. Zhou Chongwang stood in the rain and sneered. Good people. In Qin Mu's heart, he was a scumbag. However, he wasn't going to explain. If it was a misunderstanding, then so be it. Actually, it was quite good for her to be with Guze. At least, Guze really liked her. He knew that he had liked her for many years. Moreover, Guze would protect her and would do a better job than him. Zhou Chongwang smiled. The rain fell on his face, shining, but it was hard to tell if it was the rain or his tears. He sat back in the car, disregarding the fact that his clothes were all wet. The car drove very fast. In the vegetarian restaurant, Qin Mu was a little absent-minded. She ate whatever Guze put on her plate. After a long time, Guze finally smiled. Can you still eat? Qin Mu looked up at him, then at her plate. She seemed to have eaten a lot. She looked a little uncomfortable as she forced out a smile. I'm full. Wait for me for a while then. He was still smiling. He started eating very quickly, as though he was really hungry. Qin Mu couldn't help but ask, you haven't eaten all this while. You just realized. Guze's eyes were a little bright. I feel that Zhou Zong is so pitiful, ha ha ha. Chapter 26:11. Qin Mu didn't say anything else. She just watched him eat. Guze didn't eat too fast or too slow, it was just right. When he was almost done, Qin Mu wanted to pay the bill, but a big hand pressed the back of her hand. She looked up. I'm just kidding. How can I let you treat me? He smiled, then got up and walked to the cashier. Qin Mu didn't fight with him. It didn't matter to her. Guze came back soon. He put his coat on her shoulders and said, I'll send you back. Qin Mu lowered her head and looked at her clothes. She wanted to refuse, but he had already put his arm around her shoulders and walked to the door. As he walked, he whispered, Qin Mu, this is a restaurant. At least give me some face. Qin Mu couldn't help laughing, you still have face. Why not? He laughed and helped her into the car. It was drizzling, cold in such a rainy winter night. But it was warm in the car. Qin Mu took off the coat and returned it to him. She also saw that his shoulder was wet in the rain. She felt a little guilty. Guze, thank you for today. If you really want to thank me, treat me to dinner next time. He wiped his body with a towel and looked at her with burning eyes. Qin Mu laughed and said, I wanted to pay the bill today, but you refused. Guze, there's no such scoundrel like you. He threw the towel aside and looked at Qin Mu seriously. Someone told me that you have to be thick-skinned to chase a girl. If you care too much about your face, you will probably be chased away by others. Qin Mu smiled. He looked at her smile and smiled too. He said with a charming voice, "What do you say, huh?" "What?" Chin-moo looked at him. "About dinner," he said with his lips and then started the car. Chin-moo looked at his side profile. He was well-defined, and a man in his 30s was very charming. She looked at Guzay and thought of Zhou Chongwang. Then, she smiled bitterly. "If you rush to pay the bill every time, will I have to treat you for the rest of your life? A lifetime's worth of food." Guzay's heart relaxed. He was pleased by her words. He looked at the road ahead and said in a very soft voice, "If I were to cook for you in the kitchen instead of treating for the rest of my life, Chin-moo, would you be willing?" Chin-moo's chest heaved slightly. She tilted her head and glanced at Guzay before turning her head away. Just at that moment, her heart was moved. It was not because of Guzay, but because of his suggestion. She thought that if he wasn't Gu Mei's brother, she might really agree. Chin-moo smiled and didn't say anything else. Guzay knew that this was her rejection and felt a little disappointed. He also knew why she had rejected him so quickly. But he didn't give up. If he could give up, he would have given up long ago. He drove in the dark, and beside him was the girl he had liked for many years. It was raining outside. Guzay drove very slowly until he stopped at her apartment. He looked sideways and saw that she was looking out of the window. "What are you thinking about?" Guzay's voice was very soft and gentle. His fingertips touched her shoulder gently, but he didn't cross the line. Chin-moo suddenly turned her head. Her eyes were watery. Guzay was stunned. Chapter 26:12. Guzay was stunned. Was she crying just now? Was she thinking of someone else by his side? His heart was heavy, but he still gave her the greatest gentleness. He reached out and gently wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. He smiled and said, "I'll send you up." Chin-moo looked down and controlled her emotions. She said in a low voice, "It's okay, Guzay." "Thank you." She placed her fingers on the car door. "Also, I don't think about the future now. Guzay, do you understand what I mean?" "I understand and respect, but I won't give up." He looked at her and reached out his hand. His fingers were in midair, and he seemed to be considering where to put them. After a long time, he finally put them down and touched her face gently. It only took a few seconds. Chin-moo's gaze was a little straight, but she didn't avoid it. "Don't look at me like that again, or I'll kiss you again." His voice was slightly hoarse. Chin-moo's body fell heavily against the back of the seat behind her. She then said in a low voice, "Guzay, I'm sorry." With that, she reached out to open the car door and got out. But her arm was caught, and she fell even harder on the back seat. Then, his hot lips pressed against hers. The burning and numbing force could almost crush her. Chin-moo wanted to struggle, but she was suppressed by him. Guzay was gentle, but when necessary, he could be rougher than anyone else. Especially for her. He hadn't had a woman for too many years, and at this moment, she was lying weakly in his car. Her resistance seemed so weak, and it aroused his desire to conquer her. He almost couldn't control himself as he kissed her and touched her, regardless of her struggle and resistance. Slowly, Chin-moo lost all her strength, and her body fell weakly on the back seat, letting him do whatever he wanted. She even kissed Guzay back. Two slender arms hung around his neck and kissed him seductively. It was the kind of way to ignite love. She was a mature woman who had been with Zhou Chongwang countless times. She knew how to ignite a man. Originally, Guzay only wanted to kiss her. He might have stopped before going too far, but at this moment, there was a ball of fire in his arms. He almost went mad. But just as he gave up everything and was about to pull her onto his body, Chin-moo let go of him. She leaned her head against the backrest and smiled. Guze, I don't feel anything. We kissed for so long, but I don't want you. Guze put his hands on both sides of her body. There were fine beads of sweat on his short black hair. His clear eyes stared at her. We can try again. If you try again, it's still physiological. Chinmu turned her face away. Guze, let's stop here. I won't make things difficult for you, and you won't make things difficult for me, okay? He didn't say anything for a long time, and just looked at her. Chinmu turned her head and looked at him. She smiled lightly. I tried Guze just now, and I really didn't feel anything. He finally moved back a little, and there was a touch of pain in his deep eyes. You only have feelings for him. Chinmu wisely chose not to answer. And Guze also wisely chose not to ask. Chapter 26:13. It wasn't that it was impossible for him and Chinmu to be together, but there were too many people and things between them. Chinmu said in a low voice, I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. You have no obligation to like me. He said in a hoarse voice, I'm sorry that I kissed you by force. So far, there are no moral constraints. Chinmu smiled, so don't blame yourself. But if there's a next time, Guze, we won't even be friends. Guze's eyes lit up again. She said that she was willing to be friends. He looked at her for a long time before saying in a low voice, I'll send you to the elevator. She nodded and didn't refuse. She also realized that the key to dealing with this man was not to refuse, but to obey. If she had obeyed him from the beginning, she wouldn't have been kissed by him. Chinmu realized that she also learned to speak insincerely. She told him not to blame himself and told him that they could be friends, but damn it, she didn't think that way at all. She would stay far away from him next time and never appear in front of him again. 5 minutes later, Chinmu said goodbye to Guze at the elevator. Guze stood outside for a long time before leaving. Chinmu was in the elevator, thinking that she should go home and brush her teeth. It was fine to be kissed by someone, but she would be stupid to be kissed by a man twice. The elevator door opened with a ding. She lowered her head to take the key card, but she didn't see the figure standing at the door. Suddenly, she was pressed against the door. There was a sharp pain in the back of her head. Chinmu screamed, today must be the day. When she opened her eyes, she saw Zhou Chongwang's angry face. Just by looking at his face, she could guess that he saw her and Guze kissing. If Guze came up with her, was he going to break Guze's legs? Chinmu looked at Zhou Chongwang and said calmly, Mr. Zhou, can you explain your behavior? If you can't explain, I'm going to call the police. Call the police. He sneered, still holding her down. Tell the police that your ex-husband is going to rape you. Chinmu was furious and stretched out his leg to step on him. However, Zhou Chongwang easily subdued her and said in a low and hoarse voice, when Guze kissed you, did you call the police? What does it have to do with you, Mr. Zhou? Chinmu smiled coldly. I don't think I need your approval to kiss anyone. She smelled the alcohol in his mouth and knew he had drunk. She didn't want to argue with him anymore. In front of her is a married man, is her ex-husband. They had just said that they would never see each other again. What was he doing now? Chinmu was a little angry and wronged, but she didn't want to show weakness in front of him. She pursed her lips and glared at him. Get out of my way. Do you treat Guze like this too? Not only did he not get out of her way, but he touched her slightly swollen lips with a pained look in his eyes. He thought that kissing her was his exclusive right, but it wasn't. She belongs to someone else now. She can kiss whoever she wants. But it can't be him, right? Zhou Chongwang's eyes were filled with anger. He held her head and wanted to kiss her. He wanted to wash away the smell of another man, but when he touched her lips, she said coldly, "Zhou Chongguang, if you dare touch me, I'll go to bed with Guze tomorrow." Chapter 26:14. He looked at her in disbelief and couldn't believe what he had heard. What did she say? "I'm not joking, Zhou Chongguang, don't force me." Qin Mu leaned her head against the wall. "I hate being entangled with you. Zhou Chongguang, why don't you stay away from me? You let me see that scene and now you're accusing me of kissing someone else. That's so funny. You should go back and repent to Gume on your knees," she said coldly. His body was still stiff, and after a long time, he finally said, "Is that what you think?" Qin Mu's tone was firm. "Yes." He squinted at her and took a step back. At this moment, Qin Mu found that her body was covered with water. It was the water on Zhou Chongguang's body. She pursed her lips. Did he run outside in the rain for an hour? The marble at the door was also covered with water. The water squeezed out of his clothes could be used to feed fish. She realized that his body seemed to be very hot just now. Qin Mu leaned against the door and looked at him stubbornly. Zhou Chongguang took a step back and said coldly, "I know, Qin Mu. I won't disturb you anymore." He was a little drunk, so he came to find her. He laughed at himself. In fact, every word she said just now was right. What right did he, Zhou Chongguang, have to come to find her again, except that he still loved her, he had nothing. Or, he only had money that she didn't need. He had nothing. Zhou Chongguang stepped back and entered the elevator. When the elevator closed, Qin Mu and his eyes looked at each other. That second seemed to last for an eternity. Qin Mu's legs were a little weak. She still stood there and suddenly felt very tired. She was tired of dealing with two men in one night. She walked into her house and called Qin Chen while turning on the bath water. "Qin Chen, I should be leaving soon." The person on the other side chuckled. "So urgent?" "No." She looked up and said in a choked voice, "I just want to take a vacation." "I guess you've been kissed by a man tonight." Qin Chen's voice was very light. Qin Mu was silent for a long time, but she still told the truth. It was Guze. It was just a forced kiss. Qin Chen was quite surprised. He had heard from his brother that Guze liked Qin Mu, but Guze was really brave. His sister had become the wife of Qin Mu's ex-husband. Now that he had come to pursue Mumu, their relationship would be too subtle. Qin Chen had a headache just thinking about it. He asked his little Mumu, "Are you tempted?" "No." Qin Mu reached out to stir the water. "I refused. I'll just hide a little in the future." She thought that if it weren't for Gume, a man like Guze might be her lover in this situation, but in terms of identity, she really couldn't accept it. Qin Chen smiled. "Mumu, you're tempted." "No, I won't come again." Qin Mu was a little coquettish. Qin Chen stopped joking with her and just said a few words. Qin Mu hung up the phone and was alone in the big house. She was soaking in the bathtub. She lived a rich life and really had nothing to complain about. She made herself look very miserable. She was just a little lonely after tasting such a wonderful married life. Chapter 26:15. Qin Mu didn't want to think too much about it. She got up and wiped herself clean with a towel. Then, she put on a bathrobe and walked to the dressing table in the master bedroom. This was a new addition. In the past, Qin Chen didn't use this thing. Qin Chen lived like a man. In the changing room, there were all kinds of high-end watches, wallets, belts, and so on. It was very complete. As a girl, Qin Mu definitely didn't have half of Qin Chen's luxury. Qin Chen was the kind of person who looked indifferent but was very demanding. So, if Lan Yu wanted to get Qin Chen, it would be easier to go to the moon. Qin Mu sat in front of the dressing table, squeezing out skincare products and carefully taking care of her skin. She was only 23 years old and wouldn't give up on herself just because she lost her marriage. Maybe one day, she would meet her Mr. Right. It wouldn't be good if it was an old woman. Qin Mu patted her skin in front of the mirror. Just then, her phone rang. She picked it up and looked at it. It was Zhao Zi. It was so late. Why was he looking for her? Qin Mu hung up. It was all about Zhou Chongguang. She didn't have a good impression of Zhao Zi. But she had just hung up when her phone rang again. It was endless. Qin Mu was a little angry. She threw her phone away and turned it off when it was still ringing. She felt that she had to stay abroad for a year and a half before coming back. Then, it should be quiet. She would leave the art gallery to share. Anyway, if she couldn't do it, her brother would help. Qin Mu thought sinisterly. Thinking about it, she turned 2 rounds on the soft bed. After taking a shower, her body felt comfortable and her mood improved. But some people obviously didn't want her to be in a good mood. Half an hour later, when she was watching TV in the living room, there was a hurried knock on the door. Qin Mu let out a long breath and ignored it. But that voice really couldn't be ignored. She thought for a long time and finally walked over. Through the peephole, he saw Zhao Zi's face, which was somewhat unfriendly. Qin Mu opened the door and was about to speak when she saw Zhou Chongguang lying on the ground. Zhao Zi extended his leg and kicked Zhou Chongguang. I've sent him here. Do as you see fit. Qin Mu almost went crazy. She could tell at a glance that Zhou Chongguang was dead drunk. What was the point of bringing him to her like this? Get him a doctor. It's almost 40 degrees, and he's been drinking all night. Zhao Zi looked at her and said coldly, it's fine if you want to be with Gu Zhe, but don't let Chongguang see it. Otherwise, he won't be able to bear it and won't be able to live. Qin Mu sneered, no one can live without him. Why don't you ask him how he felt when he kissed the little star in the car? Why are you pretending to be a Casanova now? Qin Mu slammed the door in his face. This time, she wouldn't open it even if she died. Zhao Zi looked at the closed door and let out a long sigh. He kicked Zhou Chongguang again. He really didn't want to care, and he didn't want to drag him to Qin Mu's place. But Zhou Chongguang didn't want to come here. A drunk and frustrated man was as scary as it could be. And what was with the little star that Qin Mu mentioned just now? Did he really make out with someone in front of Qin Mu? Chapter 26:16. Zhao Zi squatted down and patted Zhou Chongguang's face. Okay, I'll take you to the hospital. Don't embarrass yourself in front of your ex-wife. I'm embarrassed for you. If it weren't for his bad behavior, he wouldn't be here today. Originally, he didn't want to bother Qin Mu, but he had no choice. If this dragged on, even if Zhou Chongguang didn't die, he would probably become stupid from the fever. Did he want to die with a high fever and alcohol? Zhao Zi smiled at Qin Mu and said shamelessly, then I'm leaving. Qin Mu glared at him and said, I won't care about him. Zhao Zi looked at her and said, then he deserves it. With that, he really didn't care about Zhou Chongguang's life and left first. Qin Mu slapped the elevator door angrily. Even if she wanted to drag him away, she couldn't drag Zhou Chongguang away. However, the elevator had already gone down and soon reached the first floor. Qin Mu looked at the red words and bit her lip. Then she ran home and wanted to call Xingyuan Hospital with her phone to drag the drunkard and the patient away. However, as soon as she walked in, she was hugged from behind. Zhou Chongguang's body was extremely hot, and his wet clothes were almost dry. He said in a hoarse voice, "Moo, don't go." Qin Mu didn't move. She said quietly, "Zhou Chongguang, don't play a hooligan under the influence of alcohol. Zhao Zi believes you, but I won't." He had lost his credibility with her. She reached out and wanted to break free from him. She had thought that people who were sick were weak. After all, he had been lying on the ground like a dead pig just now, but now he was full of energy. Qin Mu couldn't break free, so she was a little annoyed. "I'll call an ambulance." He pressed his head against her shoulder and said in a deep voice, "Moo, the doctor can't cure me." His breath smelled strongly of alcohol, making her wonder how much he had drunk, and he was really hot. Qin Mu didn't want to be entangled with him, but she wasn't vicious enough to want him to die. So she softened her voice, "Let me go. You'll burn yourself silly if you keep doing this." Then she said mockingly, "You're stupid. You can leave all the family property to Gu Mei. She can make you wear countless green hats." After she finished speaking, the man on her shoulder chuckled. "I don't care about that. Even if she sleeps with 100 men, I don't care." He was still drunk. He began to nibble on her little shoulder and said in a hoarse voice, "But Moo, why did you make me a cuckold?" Qin Mu was speechless. She divorced him. Even if there was something between her and Gu Zhe, how could it be considered as wearing a green hat? She did not speak and tightened her arms around his waist. He said in a hoarse voice, "Moo, why did you let him kiss you?" His tone was a little interrogative, and then he ruthlessly bit her. "Have you slept with him before?" Qin Mu was furious. "Zhou Chongguang, you've drunk too much." "I'm not drunk. I've always been sober." He said in a low voice, "Moo, who's better between me and him?" "Zhou Chongguang." She was furious. But he still didn't give up. "Can he satisfy you as much as I can?" Qin Mu turned around and slapped him in the face. With a loud smack, her hand hurt, and at the same time, he woke up a little. Zhou Chongguang pursed his lips and chuckled. He took a step back and looked at her quietly. Chapter 26:17. The force almost broke her. He kissed her almost crazily, trying to wash away the taste left by Gu Zhe on her lips. She was pressed against the door by him, and his black eyes were fixed on her eyes. Probably because he was drunk, he said what he usually wouldn't say. When he said that, his eyes were full of pain. "Moo, I really want to let you go like this, let you be happy, and let you find a man to marry, but seeing you with him, I'm still jealous." His strength was so valiant, but his voice was weak. He had lowered his posture to the point of being like a speck of dust. His face was buried in her neck. After a while, Qin Mu felt that her neck was wet and hot. Was that Zhou Chongguang crying? He didn't raise his face, probably because he didn't want to lose face. He only said in a low voice, "Moo, how can we go back to the past? Tell me." His fingers tightened and he spat out a few words. "I regret it." Only when he was drunk could he say these words. Only at this time, he put down all his pride and self-esteem and begged her in a low voice. He knew that he had no face, but he didn't want it anymore. He didn't want anything else. He just wanted his Moo. "Qin Mu, let's go abroad and never come back." "I don't want anything." His voice was low and hoarse. "I love you. Do you feel it?" Qin Mu chuckled. "Are those women your love?" She lowered her head and looked at his black hair. "Zhou Chongguang, I'm no longer a little girl. The Qin Mu who made my heart soften when you played the zither is gone. She's dead. You disappointed her again and again. You made her despair. You're also the one who asked for a divorce, remember? After saying that, she couldn't help but turn her face aside. The love was too deep. After he had done so much, she still couldn't bear to hurt him. Because he looked so unwell here, her heart still ached for him. Zhou Chongwang attached himself to her neck and did not move for a long time. When she thought he was asleep, he said in a low voice, "Mumu, there's no one else." He kissed her neck. "Ever since we got together, there has been no one else, no Gu Mei, and no other women." Her body trembled. But then, she felt relieved. Whether he had someone else or not had nothing to do with her. She looked down. "Can you get a divorce now?" Zhou Chongwang looked up into her eyes. Qinmu chuckled, "You can't you? Even if Gu Mei is standing on the rooftop, you still have to go, right?" "Zhou Chongwang, love isn't enough between us." Her voice became even softer. "I believe that you love me, and I believe that you will give up everything for me. But I know Gu Mei better. She won't let you go. As for me, just take it that I'm selfish and can't get through this with you." His body trembled. His Mumu was actually very smart. She had already guessed the relationship between him and Gu Mei, and she also knew that he was just acting with those women. She didn't expose it because she didn't care, or she didn't intend to care. He was the person she had given up on. Zhou Chongwang let go of her slightly, and there was a touch of sadness in the corner of his mouth. "Will you be with Gu Zhe?" Chapter 26:18. She nodded and said, "Zhou Chongwang, if you don't pester me, I won't do anything stupid. But if you do this again, I will think that Gu Zhe is the best choice, because then you can't pester me anymore, right?" Zhou Chongwang smiled and took a step forward. Then, he collapsed in front of her. Qinmu was shocked. There was a difference between being drunk and unconscious. For a moment, she really wanted to call Gu Mei and ask her to take her man home. She would be very happy that way, but when Zhou Chongwang woke up, he would be in great pain. She thought about it and gave up. She called the hospital and found a doctor on duty. The doctor came quickly and prepared the medical supplies. He even brought a nurse. When they saw that it was Zhou Chongwang, the doctor and the nurse were surprised, but they didn't dare to say anything. The nurse took Zhou Chongwang's temperature. It had risen to 41 degrees Celsius. The nurse said seriously, "He will die." Qinmu looked at Zhou Chongwang with a pale face. At this moment, the wet clothes on his body had already been removed by her. He was not wearing anything. She looked at him and felt that he didn't want to live anymore. If he didn't cherish himself now, why did he do that in the beginning? Qinmu sighed and looked at the doctor. "Give him an 4." The doctor smiled and said, "Of course. Someone has to keep watch tonight and wipe his body from time to time to cool down. We have to do both." Qinmu nodded, "I will." The nurse and the doctor looked at each other and knew that the ex-husband and wife must have feelings for each other. One was so drunk and drenched in the rain, and the other seemed to feel sorry for him. The doctor prescribed 2 bottles of medicine and gave him an injection to reduce the fever. The nurse stayed again. Qinmu told her to go and rest. He would call her after the drip was done. She was not used to being with others in such a private place at home. When the nurse went to rest in the living room, Qinmu wrung a warm towel and walked to the bedside. She carefully lifted the blanket, not daring to take a closer look, and gently wiped his body. She told herself that when his fever subsided tomorrow, she would fly straight to New York. In the future, she would try to avoid him as much as possible. After a year in New York, he would probably forget all about it. Tonight was the last night that belonged to them. Qinmu smiled. She seemed to have never taken care of him. He had never been so weak. Zhou Chongguang had always been strong. Even when his mother left, he was still busy plotting against her. He had never been like this. Qin Mu gently wiped his body and took his temperature again. When his temperature dropped a little, she felt a little relieved. After working for a while, she was sweating all over and felt uncomfortable. She took a shower and changed into a bathrobe. She didn't dare to sleep, so she curled up on the sofa and read a magazine, glancing at Zhou Chongguang from time to time. Half an hour later, she would take his temperature and wipe his body again. He got better bit by bit, and by 2:00 in the morning, the temperature had risen to 39 degrees. After the drip was removed, she still didn't dare to sleep. Under the dim light, she wiped his body over and over again. At 4:00 in the morning, he woke up briefly, but he was in a daze. Chapter 26:19. Her movements were very, very gentle. Zhou Chongguang suddenly closed his eyes, and 2 drops of hot liquid slowly slid down from the corner of his eyes. He could feel that Qin Mu still had him in her heart. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so gentle. Qin Mu wouldn't do what she didn't want to do. If she didn't love him anymore, she would directly throw him into the hospital. Just as she said, his life or death actually had nothing to do with her. He closed his eyes and felt very sad. Not for himself, but for his Mumu. His fingers gently caught her hand. Qin Mu looked up, but he still closed his eyes and said nothing. He gently took her hand and pulled her into his arms. He held her with one palm on her waist and the other on the back of her head. He held her like this for a long time, as if he would hold her until the end of time. "I'm sorry," he said softly. At this moment, he finally let go. It was because he felt her love and her pain. He made her suffer. This wasn't what he wanted. After being drunk, a person was the most sober. His heart was burning, and it was full of reluctance. "Mumu, I'm really letting go this time. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." He just held her like this and did nothing. He held her like he did in the past and quietly spent their last night together. It was a peaceful night. At this moment, he even thought that it didn't matter if they were together or not. She still loved him. And he loved her. They loved each other. A happy smile appeared on Zhou Chongguang's lips. He said in a hoarse voice, "Will no one ever be able to replace my place in your heart? That year, I sat there and played the piano. You were only 14 years old." Qin Mu's nose turned sour. She buried her face in his arms and said in a low voice after a long time, "Zhou Chongguang, you only know how to make me cry." He smiled warmly. His girl, 14 years old, was now 23 years old. She had given him 9 years of youth, but in the end, all he had given her was hurt and an insignificant apology. However, he still had to apologize, because other than this, he could not give her anything else. Tonight was the last of the absurdities. He only wished that there would never be daylight. He only wished that he could hug her like this forever. He hugged her and said a lot of things, which made her laugh and cry. In that night's embrace, they let go of each other and themselves. He said, "Mumu, starting tomorrow, I won't appear in front of you again." She said yes. He said, "You must be happy. If you like Guze, you should accept him. He will love you." She also said yes, but she cried. In this world, there was only one Zhou Chongguang, but he couldn't give her the complete him, and she didn't want an incomplete him. He could only apologize and give her his blessings with a smile. For them, this night was long and short. This night was gentle and cruel. Never had such peace. However, the morning sun was so cruel. Zhou Chongguang slowly opened his eyes. He saw a white pillow and smelled Chin Mu's body fragrance. He shook his head to get rid of the drowsiness in his head. Beside the bed was a young nurse. She said softly, "Zhou Zong, you're finally awake." Zhou Chongwang immediately looked around. He was in the ward, not in Chin Mu's apartment. Chapter 26:20. The nurse bit her lip and said carefully, "Zhou Zong, a day has passed since that night, which means the day after tomorrow." Zhou Chongwang stared at her. The nurse pursed her lips. "Miss Chin seems to have gone abroad." Zhou Chongwang closed his eyes slightly. He wanted to ask something, but he gave up in the end. He lifted the quilt, walked to the window and looked at the sky outside. Chin Mu had gone abroad. Probably. She wouldn't come back for a long time. She was hiding from him, he knew. Zhou Chongwang reached into his pocket to find a cigarette, but he was wearing a hospital gown, so there was no cigarette. He stood there for a long time, and the nurse stood behind him, feeling a little sad. She whispered, "When Miss Chin left, she was actually reluctant to part with me." Zhou Chongwang turned his head, and his eyes were a little red. The nurse's voice became even lower. "Zhou Zong, get over it. With Miss Chin's background, it's impossible for her to be unclear with you. She also said too much, and she regretted it a little, afraid that Zhou Zong would be angry." But Zhou Chongwang looked at her, and after a long time, he whispered, "It's like this. She's not wrong." He lowered his voice again. "It's my fault, I let her down." He stood there for a long time. When he reached the door, Gumei stood there, and the nurse whispered to him, "Zhou Zong, your wife is here." Zhou Chongwang didn't turn around, and he just asked indifferently, "Did you inform her?" "No." The nurse shook her head. "Do you want to see her?" Zhou Chongwang looked down. "Go out first." The nurse nodded and left the room, giving the couple some space to themselves. Gumei closed the door and suppressed her voice. "Chongwang, why didn't you tell me that you were sick?" He looked at her, and slowly walked back to the bed to lie down. His voice was very indifferent. "Did you come here because you saw my scandal?" Gumei didn't quarrel with him like before. She seemed to have calmed down. She walked to his bed and sat down. She pursed her lips. "Let's not hurt each other like that, okay?" "All right." He said indifferently, "It's fine if you don't want a divorce. We can continue to be husband and wife, but Gumei, I won't sleep with you." She trembled with anger, but still said calmly, "I can wait." "Even if I have a woman outside?" he asked, looking at her cruelly. He was cruel to her, but he was also cruel to himself. He had already decided to bury himself in this marriage. That way, Gumei could only hurt him and not Chin Mu. He wanted Chin Mu to live a good life. This time, he would not pester her anymore. Gumei's lips trembled. "You, go home." Zhou Chongwang didn't say anything else. He was tired of it. He didn't want to torture himself anymore. Letting him go would also let Gumei live. Let Mumu soar high and let her be happy. He was discharged from the hospital and went to work at the company. He would go home every night, but he wouldn't sleep in the same bedroom as Gumei. Gumei didn't try her best to seduce him, because he wasn't eating at home now, and the water was purified water that she had prepared herself. They were in the same house, but they didn't seem like husband and wife at all. It was like two strangers renting a room. Good morning kiss, nothing else. To him, this place was like a hotel. Gumei even knew that he sometimes solved it himself, holding his phone. Chapter 26-21. He still couldn't forget Chin Mu, but he didn't go to that villa anymore. He was well-behaved and would occasionally date a small celebrity. It wasn't too frequent, but he would always date one. The celebrity that he dated the most was called Kiki. Gume couldn't do anything to him. She also knew that she couldn't force him, otherwise, he might really divorce her. Without Shuemu, she had no chance of winning, so she could only endure. After enduring for a long time, Gume became haggard day by day and lost a lot of weight. She was still waiting for Zhou Chongguang to change his mind. But that man's heart couldn't hold anything anymore. In a restaurant, Zhou Chongguang sat quietly in front of the piano, and the girl called Kiki sat beside him. She was wearing a black gown, and her hair was black and straight. Zhou Chongguang's slender fingers landed on the piano keys, and a string of melodious music was heard. He closed his eyes and immersed himself in his own world. Chi-Chi looked at his handsome side profile with some fascination. This man had probably reached the age of 30, and he had a kind of cold and noble temperament that could fascinate young girls. Although Kiki was a little tempted, she didn't dare to act rashly. She could only accompany Zhou Chongguang, listen to him play the piano, and watch him immerse himself in the past. At this time, she didn't dare to make a sound, because he was very focused. This man was obsessed with work, and it seemed that this was the only fun left in his life. As for her, because of her resemblance to Qin Mu, she became a substitute. But she knew her own identity. From that night onwards, he didn't touch her, and she didn't dare to. To Kiki, Zhou Chongguang was her benefactor. He not only gave her money, but also gave her resources. In just a month, she became a B-list artist, which was something she didn't dare to imagine. Although she was still far from the A-list, she would work hard. Her idol was Zhou Zong's ex, Lin Shui. From the young Kiki's point of view, Lin Shui was a success. However, she had no idea that Lin Shui had also been caught red-handed by Qin Mu and ended up falling out with Gu Mei. Lin Shui and Zhou Chongguang barely had any contact now, but Lin Shui's acting skills seemed to have exploded all of a sudden. Some film critics said that Lin Shui had found her specialty and acted in a suitable role. All in all, Lin Shui had soared to the sky in one go. Kiki was secretly a little envious. She wondered when she would be able to be like that. With the help of Zhou Zong's resources, she would be able to have a small fire. However, she only dared to think about it secretly. Her main task now was to coax Zhou Zong. Zhou Zong was not hard to serve. The main thing was that he had to be quiet and not be disturbed. Especially when he was playing the piano. If she dared to make a sound, she would probably have to get lost. Kiki pursed her lips and stared at Zhou Chongguang's handsome features and his sexy Adam's apple. She was a little fascinated. Just when she was fascinated, Zhou Chongguang stopped playing the piano. He looked at her quietly, and there was a hint of confusion in his eyes. His tone was very indifferent. "Mumu, play with me." Kiki was stunned. "Zhou Zong. I'm not, and I don't know how to play the piano." Zhou Chongguang was stunned for a moment, then he smiled and said, "No." Chapter 26-22. He murmured, "I thought she was the one who did it." Kiki was speechless. "Zhou Zong, haven't you always seen me as a human skin? Why are you saying that you've mistaken me for someone else? If you say that you didn't do it on purpose, I'll beat you to death." However, Kiki only dared to curse in her heart. On the surface, she still flattered him. "Zhou Zong, you were too engrossed just now." Zhou Chongguang glanced at her and didn't say anything. At this moment, Zhao Yan walked over. This restaurant belonged to him. Kiki was also tactful. She had seen Zhou Zong and Zhao Yan talking many times, so she knew that they were familiar with each other, so she left quietly. Zhou Chongguang stood up and smiled. "Do you want to play?" No, you've played very well. Zhao Yan leaned against the side with a glass of brandy in his hand. There was a charming smile on his lips. Zhou Chongguang, there was nothing in your music that moved me before, but now, there is. Zhou Chongguang looked at his hands and smiled faintly. It's probably because I lost Fang Zhenxin. I was still a little bit lacking in the past. This little bit was probably given to me by Mumu. Zhao Yan's smile deepened. Are you sure it wasn't given by that little star just now? Zhou Chongguang shook his head and smiled. You're also making fun of me. Zhao Yan gave the waiter a look, and the waiter immediately brought a glass of brandy like his to Zhou Chongguang. The two equally good-looking men stood side by side, which was very pleasing to the eye. They had never thought that after Qin Mu left, they would see each other often. However, they missed the same woman. Zhou Chongguang's slender fingers gently stroked the cup, his eyes as calm as water. Did she contact you? Zhao Yan smiled. No. Then he raised his eyebrows. What about you? She didn't even contact you. Why would she care about me? Zhou Chongguang smiled bitterly and took a sip of brandy. After a while, he chuckled and said, that's it. Let her live a peaceful life. He looked at Zhao Yan and then looked around. Are you interested in finding another place to have a drink? Your place, he smiled again. It's too elegant. It's not suitable for people who want to drown their sorrows in alcohol. Why do you come here often if it's not suitable for you? Zhao Yan glanced at him, but still agreed. Walking from this restaurant to the opposite side was the night bar. It was 9:00 at this time, and there were not many people in the bar. Zhou Chongguang and Zhao Yan were sitting on either side of the table. The two men each had a glass of wine and were smoking cigarettes. After a long silence, Zhao Yan frowned. What happened to the girl in the restaurant just now? Is she the one who knocked the door with the car? Zhou Chongguang exhaled a mouthful of smoke and then smiled. What do you mean by the car shaking the door? Nothing like that. Zhao Yan's face was full of gossip. Was it a photo? It was a deep kiss. Don't tell me nothing happened. His words aroused the thorn in Zhou Chongguang's heart. He was stunned for a long time before he said in a low voice, Mumu also saw it that day. In fact, nothing happened. Kiki just looks a little like Qin Mu. I often look at her and feel better. Moreover, it also distracted Gu Mei's attention. He didn't want Gu Mei to keep focusing on Qin Mu. Chapter 26-23. Zhao Yan smiled. You really are a Casanova. He liked Qin Mu too, but he had never gotten her before, so he wasn't as disappointed as Zhou Chongguang. Yes, disappointed. Zhou Chongguang's face was filled with disappointment. It was so fucking satisfying to look at him. Zhou Chongguang looked up and glanced at Zhao Yan. He was in a bad mood. Zhao Yan's expression was clear as day, so he said coldly, Zhao Yan, don't think that I don't know you're thinking about my wife. At this moment, the two of them hadn't drunk too much and were still very sober. However, when Zhou Chongguang said the words my wife, he did so in a righteous and natural manner. Zhao Yan crossed his arms in front of him and sneered, is she your wife? Zhou Chongguang doesn't even blush when he says that. As he said that, he filled Zhou Chongguang's glass. Also, don't say that to me. I've always been a gentleman to Qin Mu. Zhou Chongguang drank the wine that he poured for him in one gulp. He was probably being presumptuous on purpose. After he finished drinking, he stared at Zhao Yan with bloodshot eyes. What do you mean? Zhao Yan smiled and filled his glass as well. He drank it in one gulp and leaned back in his chair. He said calmly, you know very well that Guze is the one who is thinking about your wife. He kissed Qinmu before, and I heard that the kiss was quite deep. This ignited Zhou Chongguang's beast blood, but he had no choice but to stare at Zhao Yan. Just as Zhao Yan said, Qinmu wasn't his wife anymore. He couldn't control who she wanted to kiss or hug. But he still felt sad. In his heart, she was still his wife. She was still the shy little wife nestled in his arms with her eyes closed. Zhao Yan watched helplessly as Zhou Chongguang drank a lot. He lowered his eyes. Actually, who wouldn't feel uncomfortable? He liked Qinmu, but he didn't have Guze's courage, nor was he as sentimental as Guze. Zhao Yan's love for Qinmu had always been on the fence. As for Guze, he was the one with the deepest obsession. Perhaps on this point, Guze and Gu Mei were biological siblings, and there was nothing wrong with that. However, when it came to relationships, Guze was obviously much more magnanimous. If it wasn't his, he could still give his blessings. Zhao Yan's reminder became a thorn in Zhou Chongguang's heart. He clearly knew that he should not care about it, and he could not afford to. He didn't have the status or the position to care about her present and future, but his heart was fucking uncomfortable. Zhao Yan, drink up, he said in a calm voice. He poured himself another cup and drank it in one gulp. Zhao Yan looked at him calmly and smiled. Wasn't it just drinking wine? Who wouldn't want to get drunk? Zhao Yan smiled. 2 hours later, there was a pile of empty wine bottles in front of the two men. Zhou Chongguang leaned on the table and muttered Qinmu's name, while Zhao Yan leaned on the table and smiled. Later, when they left the bar, Zhou Chongguang heaved a sigh of relief. Zhao Yan wasn't any better. In the strong night wind, Zhou Chongguang suddenly pounced on Zhao Yan. Zhao Yan was caught off guard and took a few steps back. Then, a bruise appeared on his face. He wiped his lower lip and cursed, "You're really crazy." Zhou Chongguang sneered, "Yes. Yes, I'm crazy." Chapter 26-24. His voice was a little hoarse. Under the neon lights at night, there was a glimmer of light in the corner of his eyes. Zhou Chongguang was stunned for a moment. He was a little hesitant, but Zhao Yan had already pounced over and they were soon wrestling. The alcohol made the violent factor in his body rapidly expand to the limit. His fists hit flesh, and it was the kind that was very painful. He could almost hear the sound of muscles tearing. On the street in the middle of the night, they were like two beasts, as if there was no tomorrow. They fiercely intertwined until they were exhausted and lying on the concrete ground of the city. The excessive pain made him unable to feel cold. He just lay there, gasping for breath and looking at the night sky above him. After a long time, Zhao Yan turned his head and looked at Zhou Chongguang. The two of them looked at each other and then they both laughed. Their faces were covered in thick makeup, and they looked miserable and ridiculous. Zhao Yan panted and looked up at the sky again. "Zhou Chongguang, I haven't fought so happily for a long time. Do you know, this is the first time, and also for the girl I love." Zhou Chongguang cursed again. "You fucking said you didn't think about my wife before." "Yes, I did." Zhao Yan smiled and then said softly, "I have liked her for a long time. That kind of faint love is very beautiful, a high-priced businessman like you can't understand it." Zhou Chongguang glared at him. Zhao Yan smiled softly again. "But, she only treats me as a friend." So, he had never forced her and just quietly stayed by her side. Zhou Chongguang still pursed his lips and said nothing. Zhao Yan suddenly turned his head and looked at Zhou Chongguang. "I am going to get married." Zhou Chongguang was a little surprised and asked very slowly, "Get married?" "Yes, it's one of my students." Xiao Yan said very softly. She accidentally rolled in the sheets and she got pregnant. I have to take responsibility. So, he didn't even have the right to like Qin Mu now. Zhou Chengwang blinked. He had lived for so many years, but he had never been so cute. Xiao Yan chuckled, you can rest assured now. He pursed his lips and propped himself up. The wedding is next month. You can come. Zhou Chengwang also stood up and called out to Xiao Yan, hey, wait a minute. Xiao Yan turned back. Under the neon lights, his expression was one of disappointment. At this moment, Zhou Chengwang realized that he was being used tonight. The one who really wanted to drink was Xiao Yan. Just because he got someone pregnant, he couldn't think about his ex-wife anymore. So, he was sad and disappointed, and he even wanted to beat him up to stand up for Qin Mu. Zhou Chengwang's heart was in a mess. It would be hard for him to get a divorce. It would also be miserable for him to marry a woman like Gu Mei. No matter how miserable Xiao Yan was it as miserable as him? The new wife must be well-behaved and obedient. Maybe in a few years she will be another Qin Mu. And he, Zhou Chengwang, was the one who would be in prison for the rest of his life. Thinking of this, Zhou Zong felt distressed and hugged himself. Then, he would teach that hateful person a lesson. They had already shaken hands and made up, but Zhou Zong regretted it. He dragged Xiao Yan over again, and the two of them were violent again. In the end, Xiao Yan laughed. If you hit me again, I probably won't get married. I'll just have a funeral. Chapter 26-25. Zhou Chengwang kicked him and said, Pfft. He took 2 steps back and said, you should stay by your wife's side from now on. Don't pester someone else's wife for no reason. As he spoke, he staggered deeper into the neon lights. Xiao Yan tilted his head and looked at her. He smiled and said, she's not your wife now. Zhou Chengwang waved his hand and said, it doesn't matter. She's my wife, and you. He didn't say anything else. He walked deeper and deeper into the neon lights. Xiao Yan looked at him and felt that his back was lonely. Would Zhou Chengwang be lonely for the rest of his life? He didn't know. He only knew that if Qin Mu didn't come back to him, Zhou Chengwang would be unhappy for the rest of his life. Xiao Yan covered his face and chuckled softly. His only love had ended in a fight. She didn't even know about it. On the other side, Zhou Chengwang was only wearing a shirt and holding a dirty coat in his hand. He walked slowly until he couldn't walk anymore. Then he leaned against the wall, took out a wrinkled cigarette from his pocket and lit it gently. He looked up at the moonlight in the sky. At this moment, no matter where Qin Mu was, she saw the same moonlight as he did. They lived in this world and looked at the same moonlight. Even if she got married again, she was Zhou Chengwang's wife. She was still someone he loved. What did it matter if they were together or not? He even knew that she was at Qin Chen's place. As for why Qin Chen called her over, and whether he showed her Shui Mu, he didn't know, but he knew that Qin Mu was kind. She wouldn't hurt Shui Mu. But she probably wouldn't like Shui Mu either. After all, he was his and Gu Mei's child. Any woman would feel uncomfortable. But she had been gone for so long and still hadn't come back. He wanted to go over, but he knew he couldn't. He said he would set her free, so he had to keep his promise. Come to think of it, he hadn't seen little Shui Mu for a month. Aunt Zhang had called a few times, saying that the child was doing well. If he was doing well, he wouldn't go over, lest Gu Mei got suspicious. Zhou Chengwang thought about it quietly, and a smile appeared on his lips. At this moment, he was very happy. At this time, there was only him and Qin Mu in his world. He did not know when he started to fall in love. Rather than saying that it was him and Chinmu, it was more like him and himself. He stood there until dawn, then dragged himself back to the apartment. As before, he went to his bedroom. The sky had just brightened, so Gumei should not have woken up yet. But as soon as he opened the door, he saw Gumei sitting in the living room. She was wearing pajamas, and her face was very haggard, as if she hadn't slept for the whole night. She was about to make things difficult for him, but when she saw the injuries all over Zhou Chongguang's body, she forgot all the blame and hurriedly ran over to ask, "What happened to you?" Zhou Chongguang gently pushed her away. "I'm fine." "How can you be fine? Who hit you?" Gu Mei's face was tense, and she said with gritted teeth. Zhou Chongguang's body leaned against the wall next to the door, and there was a hint of mockery at the corner of his mouth. "You seem to be very distressed." "Of course." Gu Mei pursed her lips. "Chongguang, tell me who did it. I will make him regret it." "It was me," he said lightly. "Are you going to make me regret it too?" Gu Mei was stunned. Chapter 26-26. Zhou Chongguang held his forehead and said calmly, "I'm going to rest. Gu Mei, don't knock on my door if there's nothing important." He looked at her and said in a very indifferent voice, "You know my relationship with you. Don't do things that will bring disgrace to yourself." Gu Mei was furious, but she held it in. She knew that he had gone on a date with a celebrity last night. Recently, he had been seeing that celebrity the most. She was quite pretty and her eyes resembled Qin Mu. She knew it, but there was nothing she could do about it. As for that Lin Shui from before, she had soared to the top. Moreover, Zhou Chongguang didn't want to see her anymore, so Gu Mei couldn't do anything to her. However, she hadn't expected that after Lin Shui left, there would be a little vixen. And when Zhou Chongguang came back, he didn't sleep with her. Had he made up his mind to live the life of a monk? For a moment, Gu Mei wanted to drug him, but she didn't dare to. She was afraid that she would anger him completely, so she didn't dare to. She thought that she could soften him slowly, but after such a long time, he was becoming more and more distant from her. This was a fatal blow to Gu Mei. Now, even when she was feeling sorry for him, was he sick of it? Gu Mei's voice was very soft. "You weren't like this in the past." In the past, they were two people who trusted each other. Whenever he was down, he would look for her. Gu Mei recalled the past, and a blissful smile appeared on her lips. Zhou Chongguang looked at her and smiled faintly. "Things are different now. Gu Mei, you can wake up from your dream." As her face was ashen, he walked into the guest room. The door slammed shut, and it was like a slap to Gu Mei's face. She stood there in a daze at the door. Zhou Chongguang walked into the guest room and threw his jacket aside. He unbuttoned his shirt one by one. When there were only 2 buttons left, he let go and fell onto the bed, staring blankly at the sky. His entire body was empty. He lay there quietly for a while before going to the bathroom to take a shower. The wounds all over his body were washed with cold water. It hurt as much as it hurt, but he didn't care at all. He just stood there and showered. After showering, he wrapped a towel around himself and found his own medicine box. He carefully applied the medicine on his back. He didn't care about the parts of his back that he couldn't apply the medicine on. After finishing all this, Zhou Chongguang directly fell onto the bed. "I can't sleep. I miss Qin Mu very much." When he sat up, he coughed violently a few times and resisted the urge to vomit. He leaned against the headboard and scrolled through his phone to look at her old photos. Qin Mu smiled sweetly at the camera. That was the best time for them. Zhou Chongguang looked at it for a while, and then smiled faintly. When he laid down, his ribs hurt, but he didn't care, because no matter how painful it was, it wasn't as painful as his heart. After he fell asleep, he had a dream. In his dream, Zhao Yan's wedding partner was Qin Mu. When he woke up, his whole body was covered in hot sweat and there were injuries on his body. It was really painful. He raised his hand to look at his watch. It was already 2 in the afternoon. He pursed his lips and didn't want to sleep anymore. He got up and prepared to make something to eat. After divorcing Qin Mu, he didn't have a good life and lost a lot of weight. Chapter 26-27. Zhou Chongwang changed his clothes and opened the door to see Gu Mei sitting in the living room. She didn't do anything other than sit in the living room and watch. He suddenly felt a sense of helplessness. To be honest, this apartment wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. It was about 200 square meters. If he didn't want to see her, he could hide. However, Gu Mei stubbornly waited for him here every day. He had always ignored her and was used to it after a long time. However, he didn't know if she was upset or not. He ignored her and walked straight into the kitchen. Gu Mei actually followed him and looked at him at the door. Her voice was gentle. "Chongwang, I have something to say to you." Zhou Chongwang took out the ingredients from the fridge and placed them on the counter. "What is there to say?" He turned to look at her and his tone became even more indifferent. "You can't be talking to me about having a second child, right?" Gu Mei's face was pale. After a while, she said in a low voice, "No, I won't force you." "Then we have nothing to talk about." He started to cut the vegetables smoothly. In the past, he often cooked for Qin Mu, thinking about how to make it look and smell good. However, he wasn't in the mood now. It was fine as long as he could fill his stomach. His silence made Gu Mei extremely uncomfortable. She could no longer care about the taboos he mentioned and could no longer stand it. She pounced over and hugged his waist from behind. At that moment, Zhou Chongwang groaned because of the injuries on his body. He struggled. "Gu Mei, let go." She didn't let go. She hugged his waist and said very softly, "Chongwang, you don't have to sleep with me. You don't have to sleep with me. You can even find those small celebrities to eat with. But Chongwang, I beg you, don't ignore me." She said with a tearful voice. "Please don't ignore me. Even if you want to talk to me, even if you allow me to cook for you and wash your clothes, I'll do it. The servants will do that." He pushed her away and continued to cut the vegetables, treating her like air. Gu Mei was stunned, the tears on her face still wet. She looked at him, at her husband's neglect of her, and suddenly she laughed softly. Yes, why did he let her do it? In his heart, he only had Qin Mu as his wife. How could he let himself do the cooking and laundry? In his heart, she was nothing. "Zhou Chongwang, are you going to stay faithful to her for the rest of your life?" Gu Mei smiled gently. "What are those little stars? Will Qin Mu be moved by you?" Zhou Chongwang ignored her, treating her as if she was invisible. When he turned around to get the milk from the fridge, Gu Mei seemed to have gone crazy. She knocked all the ingredients that he had prepared onto the floor one by one. She also threw away all the dishes in the kitchen that she could see. Amidst the cracking sounds, she glared at him with bloodshot eyes. Zhou Chongwang turned around and quietly watched her crazy look. He didn't say anything and just walked to the kitchen door. Gu Mei screamed, "Chongwang, don't go." She grabbed his arm from behind. "It's my fault. I shouldn't have done that. Chongwang, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I can't control myself. I'm sick, Chongwang, I'm sick." Chapter 26-28. Gu Mei looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Chongwang, I'm really sick. Yes, you're sick, and very sick. Zhou Chongwang said softly. You're sick. With that, he walked back to the guest room and took the car key. Gu Mei was shocked. She pursed her lips and followed behind him. Chongwang, where are you going? You haven't eaten yet. I don't even have the mood to eat when I'm living with you. He sneered. Are you satisfied now? Gu Mei's expression was full of sadness. She pursed her lips and looked at him. After a long time, she said in a low voice, I'll change. But I don't have the patience. He said coldly. He pushed her away and walked out quickly. The door closed. Gu Mei stood alone in the big apartment. She laughed softly. Did she have him? No, she had never had him. He had always been Qin Mu's. His heart was there, and his body was still kept chastity for Qin Mu. Gu Mei laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. He had left, and he might never come back. All she had left was this apartment and the title of Mrs. Zhou. In a trance, she had forgotten why she wanted the title of Mrs. Zhou. Gu Mei laughed softly. After Zhou Chongwang left, he didn't go back to the villa. He was now full of sin, and going back there would only dirty the place. He found a restaurant to eat in. He sat by the glass window and ate quietly. It was raining outside. After he finished eating, he sat there and smoked. When the waiter came over and reminded him that he couldn't smoke here, Zhou Chongwang took out a few thousand yuan. Can I sit for a while? The waiter was shocked. Then she said in a low voice, I have to discuss it with the supervisor. After saying that, she ran over to discuss it. In the end, she accepted the money. But when she went back to look for the depressed man, she found that he was no longer there. The waiter was a little confused. Then she saw the man outside the glass. He stood on the road, letting the fine rain fall on his body. He kept looking forward. The waiter looked over. It was a woman with brown hair. From the back view, she could see that she had a good figure. Was that person someone this man was familiar with? Was it his wife or his ex-girlfriend? Outside, Zhou Chongwang was still standing quietly. He pursed his lips and looked at the woman in front of him. Just now, he had mistaken her for Qin Mu. But when the woman turned around, the pockmarks on her face still shocked him. His expression made the woman very angry, and she actually slapped him. Zhou Chongwang covered his face and stared blankly at the back view in front of him. The cigarette in his hand had long been soaked through by the rain. The cigarette in his pocket was also soaked. He stood there for a long time before he suddenly remembered that Qin Mu was with Qin Chen in New York. He wanted to meet him. After seeing her, he would leave without letting her see him. He smiled. When did he, Zhou Chongwang, become so lowly? This time, Zhou Chongwang was beaten up and drenched in the rain, and he fell sick again. He stayed in the hospital for 3 days before his fever subsided. But Zhao Zi was the only one who was busy in and out of the crowd. When he was discharged, Zhou Chongwang directly asked to book a hotel. He said calmly, I can't stay with Gu Mei. Chapter 26-29. Zhou Chongwang shook his head and smiled. It's better not to hurt others. Zhao Zi knew what he was thinking and smiled. I know you're afraid that you'll hurt Qin Mu after the divorce. He said seriously, Qin Mu isn't that fragile. Also, aren't you going to do something to Gu Mei? Are you going to let her do whatever she wants? Zhou Chongwang looked at Zhao Zi for a long time before he said softly, let's do it this way. It's fair. Zhao Zi wanted to persuade him, but seeing that he was so determined, he stopped. He booked a hotel for Zhou Chongwang and arranged a flight to New York 3 days later. Of course, there was also Kiki. Although Zhou Chongguang didn't say anything, Zhao Zi knew exactly who was in New York, why Zhou Chongguang was going to New York, and who he wanted to meet. Kiki was just trying to cover it up. But Zhao Zi didn't expect that his arrangement would hurt Kiki. That vain girl now treated Zhou Chongguang like heaven. She liked to be with him and knew that he wasn't interested in her. He just wanted to look at his face to comfort her and to use him as a shield. Kiki went to Glory for a few days and didn't do much. She just drank tea and chatted in the secretary office. After a long time, the young secretaries in the secretary's office quite liked her. Chi-Chi was easier to get along with than Lin Shui. After all, she came from a poor family and hadn't soared to fame yet, so she treated everyone as an equal. Chi-Chi even had a little inferiority complex. Everyone roughly understood why she could stay by President Zhang's side. It was because she was quiet and not troublesome. Kiki flipped through a magazine and looked up to ask the secretary in a low voice, "Is Zhou Zong in a meeting?" The secretary smiled. "Zhou Zong is in his office. He's quite free today." So Kiki knew that he wasn't in the mood to see her today. She was still a little excited about going to New York with him. Would they stay in a suite? Would Zhou Zong want her? Nothing good usually came from thinking too much. Zhou Chongguang didn't get off work, so Kiki had to leave first. She was in a good mood. After all, she was the only female companion of Zhou Zong, so she didn't feel too guilty. After all, Zhou Zong and his wife didn't get along. She felt sorry for Zhou Zong's ex-wife and felt that she had wronged her. But they were divorced, and she wasn't the one who ruined it. Besides, nothing had happened between her and Zhou Zong. Kiki happily opened the door of the white BMW. Zhou Zong's secretary had picked out the car for her. Everything she had was given by Zhou Zong. She knew that it was all because of her face, so she took care of her face very carefully. Most of her expenses were spent on this face. However, just as she opened the door, someone pulled her over by her shoulders. Then, her eyes lit up, and her face was filled with anxiety. Kiki covered her face in pain. She felt her face burning and contracting violently. It hurt. She was in pain. She cried out and fell to the ground, looking at Shanine in agony. And the person who splashed her tears said coldly, "It's a pity for your little face. I wanted to have some fun with it." It was a man's voice. It was like a poisonous snake that wrapped around Kiki. She couldn't forget this voice for the next few years. Chapter 26:30. Kiki was sent to the hospital. Although she was treated in time, 60% of her face was burnt and unrecognizable. Zhou Chongguang and Zhao Zi stood by the bed and looked at the white bandage on Kiki's face. Kiki had not woken up yet. They did not dare to imagine what would happen when she woke up. The two men walked outside and smoked in the hallway. Zhao Zi held the cigarette and asked, "Chongguang, you know who did this, don't you?" Zhou Chongguang did not say anything and continued to ask, "You gave up on Qin Mu because you knew she was crazy, right?" This time, Zhou Chongguang opened his mouth and his voice was almost trembling. "I can't imagine, if it was Qin Mu, would I go crazy and kill someone? He even wanted to kill Gume now. Was there anything she couldn't do?" Zhao Zi said softly, "Chongguang, your love is a sharp knife. Think about it yourself, either you get rid of Gume and get back Qin Mu, or you don't want to see her anymore. You also saw that Gume has gone crazy." Zhou Chongguang took a deep drag of the cigarette and let out a long breath. "I know." Zhao Zi knew him very well and had already guessed his decision. He sighed, "Chongguang, do you regret falling in love with Qin Mu? If they had made a clean break and divorced, nothing would have happened now." Zhou Chongwang did not answer immediately but smoked quietly. Until the cigarette was finished, he smiled bitterly. I have never regretted it. He looked at the night outside and said softly, I am willing to exchange everything for that period of time. Although it was only a few months, it was the best time of his life. Zhao Zi could only sigh. Gu Mei had an obsession and so did Chongwang. In the apartment, Gu Mei sat in front of the dressing table and applied skincare products. Behind her, a slender figure appeared, reflected in the mirror. She looked at the person in the mirror and smiled. Are you willing to come back? She turned her head around and raised her eyebrows. And here I thought that little celebrity called Chi-Chi had hooked your soul away. What answered her was a slap from Zhou Chongwang. Gu Mei's face was slapped to one side. She did not touch her wound, nor did she cry. She chuckled. Are you feeling sorry for me? Have you really fallen for Zhou Chongwang? He gave her another slap. So you had her face destroyed? Yes. Gu Mei took it. She sneered, I know she looks like Qin Mu. I just don't want you to look at her face all day long. Zhou Chongwang moved forward slowly and forced Gu Mei to the back of the chair. He placed his hands on both sides of her body and said in a low and hoarse voice, if there is a mistake, it is my fault. It has nothing to do with others. But I can't bear to punish you. Chongwang, then I can only do it to others. Gu Mei's voice was very soft and charming. However, it made one's hair stand on end. Zhou Chongwang's handsome face was filled with anger. Gu Mei, you are crazy. Yes, I am crazy. Gu Mei raised her head. With such a husband, how can I not be crazy? My life is worse than a widow's. Zhou Chongwang's Adam's apple moved and he sneered. As you wish, Gu Mei. He slowly retreated, and a few doctors in white coats walked in from the door. All of them were wearing masks, and they looked a little different from ordinary doctors. Chapter 26:31. Zhou Chongwang looked at Gu Mei and smiled faintly. What do you think? Gu Mei shook her head desperately. Chongwang, I didn't do it on purpose. Don't do this to me. She struggled and cried, I'm not crazy, I'm not crazy. But no matter what she said, he had a heart of stone. Gu Mei's face was as pale as paper. She suddenly smiled coldly. Don't tell me you've fallen for that little bitch. I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. Gu Mei's smile became even paler. She stared at Zhou Chongwang and said in a soft but hysterical voice, You're worried about Qin Mu, aren't you? You're afraid that I'll do the same to her, right? Zhou Chongwang was expressionless. You're really crazy. After saying that, he raised his hand and gestured for the doctors to take her away. No matter how much Gu Mei cried, she was still taken away. A doctor gave her a tranquilizer. Zhou Chongwang stood alone in the big apartment for a long time. He cancelled the trip to New York. A week later, he went to see Kiki. Kiki wasn't in a good mood, so the doctor and Zhou Chongwang had a long talk. The doctor took a photo and handed it to Zhou Chongwang. This is how she looks without the gauze. Zhou Chongwang couldn't take it after just one look, so he immediately put it down. The doctor sighed. It's best to do a skin graft surgery in a month. Although it won't be the same as before, if it's done a few times, at least her life will be fine. What do you think, Zhou Zong? The doctor paused and said, the patient's family has come to make a scene a few times. After all, this matter. Zhou Zong, it's better to deal with it privately. Zhou Chongwang nodded, I will. He walked out and smoked in the corridor for a while before going to the ward. If it was the past Zhou Chongwang, he wouldn't care about a girl like Kiki. She had taken his money, so it was normal for her to take such a risk, but now he thought differently. It was always a girl whose face had become like that because of him. It must be very painful. When he arrived, Zhao Zi was also there, discussing some matters with Kiki's family. Kiki was an honest person, but her mother and brother ate and wore her hard-earned money. She demanded 50 million yuan, or Zhou Chongguang would have to marry Kiki. Zhao Zi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Not to mention Kiki's current state, even if she was a sky immortal, Chongguang wouldn't marry her. Zhou Chongguang stood at the side and listened quietly. The people from Kiki's hometown didn't know him, so they kept talking to Zhao Zi. When he was almost done, Zhou Chongguang's tone was very indifferent. "Zi, give them 20 million, but transfer it to Kiki's account. You handle it. Let Kiki decide how to spend the money." This could also be considered a little compensation to Chi-Chi. He couldn't bear to spend the money just like that. She looked a little like Qin Mu. As soon as Zhou Chongguang finished speaking, the people from Kiki's hometown all rushed over like sharks smelling blood. They repeated what they had said to Zhao Zi to Zhou Chongguang. Zhou Chongguang smiled faintly. "There's nothing between me and Kiki. Besides, I have a wife. If you don't accept the 20 million and insist on me marrying her, we can take the evidence to court." Chapter 2632. Perhaps they were frightened by his aura, Kiki's family suddenly fell silent. In the end, it was Kiki's brother who said indignantly, "Then let's take 20 million then. It's a good deal for him." Zhou Chongguang took another look at him and felt that his eyebrows were protruding. He could tell that he was full of hostility at first glance. He sighed in his heart. Kiki was really pitiful. He didn't say anything and walked straight into Kiki's ward. The family only had money in their eyes. Seeing that the matter was resolved and the money was in their hands, there was no need for them to stay. They just had to get the money out of Kiki's hands in the future. But when Zhou Chongguang gave Zhao Zi one last look, Zhao Zi understood in his heart. He didn't give Kiki cash, but 20 million worth of shares of Glory Group, so that Kiki could get dividends every year. In addition, he also prepared 1 million for her living expenses and the surgery, which Zhou Chongguang paid for. He knew that he was doing his best just to make up for it. Just like when he divorced Qin Mu, he could only make up for it with money. However, he could still see Kiki and apologize to her, but Qin Mu, he couldn't see her anymore. The more he missed her, the more he couldn't see her. Zhou Chongguang's heart was filled with bitterness. When he walked in, Kiki was leaning against the headboard in a daze. After hearing the sound, she suddenly looked up at him. Her eyes were a little shocked and there were tears. But her eyes were no longer beautiful. Zhou Chongguang's heart tightened. Then, he smiled gently and sat down on the chair beside the bed. "Are you okay?" Kiki was a little helpless. She touched the gauze on her face gently and said with a trembling voice, "Zhou Zong, am I ugly now?" "Not really, but you are wrapped like a mummy. It's a little funny." He was still gentle and gave the girl the most patience. Kiki pursed her lips and lowered her head. She wanted to cry because he didn't talk so much to her in the past. He must be pitying her now. Zhou Chongguang kept looking at her. Kiki looked up. "Zhou Zong, I don't blame you. You know," he said indifferently. "If you want to sue her, I won't object." A hint of confusion appeared in Kiki's eyes. Zhou Chongguang continued, "She's now in a mental hospital. If she's diagnosed, the law probably won't be able to punish her." His tone was calm, and he was just stating a statement. He didn't want to give this unfortunate girl too much hope. He was sure that Gu Mei was crazy. There was a tinge of disappointment in Kiki's eyes. She lifted her face and smiled at him. "I understand, Zhou Zong. Right now, it was useless to hate anyone. She was the one who had an unrealistic dream. She was the one who thought that her face, which resembled Qin Mu, was too eye-catching. She then asked softly, will she always be inside? Maybe. Zhou Chongguang's tone was a little gloomy, and Kiki understood. She didn't speak anymore. There was always a sense of inferiority. When Zhou Chongguang was about to leave, she called his name in a hurry. Zhou Zong. Zhou Chongguang turned his head and saw that Kiki had a tinge of uneasiness on her face. Will you still ask me to have dinner with you in the future? His gaze fell on her face quietly. After a long time, he smiled. Kiki, when your face recovers, I'll send you to study abroad. Go to New York, a place where no one knows you. Kiki was stunned. Chapter 26:33. Kiki was stunned. She had wanted to go to New York before, but she didn't want to go to New York without him. Even though she didn't want to go, she forced a smile and said yes. Because she knew that was his answer. In the future, they wouldn't have a future. He only felt a tinge of guilt towards her. If she was smart, she wouldn't use that guilt to ask for feelings that she shouldn't have. He had given all his feelings to that girl called Qin Mu. How could he like a girl who had experienced such a thing? Chi-Chi burst into silent tears. Her tears soaked the gauze and soaked her wound. It was very painful, but she needed this kind of pain to wake up. After Zhou Chongguang walked out, he bumped into Zhao Zi. Zhao Zi was so busy that he was sweating. When he saw him, he said, a bunch of vampires. He then looked at the door and said softly, it's not easy for Kiki. Zhou Chongguang let out a long sigh. I'm the one who hurt her. Zhao Zi looked at his expression and felt sad too. He said in a low voice, Chongguang, she's not Qin Mu. Qin Mu is in New York now. He knew that Chongguang had such a big reaction to Kiki because he had overlapped Kiki and Qin Mu. He was afraid that Qin Mu would be hurt. Zhou Chongguang was silent for a long time before he said, I know. Zhao Zi patted his shoulder and said, you refused to do a checkup when you were hospitalized last time. Now that you're in the hospital, you can have a checkup. Recently, Zhou Chongguang had lost a lot of weight and he didn't look too good, so he should have a checkup. However, Zhou Chongguang shook his head and said, no need. I'm fine. Zhao Zi couldn't say anything else. He sighed and said, then smoke less. Don't ruin your body at such a young age. Zhou Chongguang just smiled and didn't say anything. He raised his head and looked to the west. Mumu was there. What was she doing? New York. Early morning. Qin Mu was already in this natural state of waking up. She lay on the snow-white pillow, her brown hair scattered, making her face look even whiter. Without the identity of the gallery owner, she dressed much more casually, and the restriction of the historical title of Mrs. Zhou was gone. The pajamas with cartoon characters reached her knees were rolled up due to her indecent sleeping posture, revealing a pair of tender legs. She was only 23 years old. Right now, she was in the state of a young girl. Qin Chen walked in and saw such a scene. He bent over and patted her. Get up. Qin Mu flipped over. Her brown, wavy hair was even more flat, and she looked extremely beautiful. She blinked and buried her face in the pillow again. I want to sleep a little longer. Qin Chen was a little amused. It's almost 9 o'clock. Qin Mu, if you continue to sleep like this, you will become fat. Qin Mu's voice was vague. Then I'll be fat. Anyway, I'm a single dog now. Qin Chen sat by her bed and smiled helplessly. There are many male dogs waiting for you to rescue them outside. Why do you have to abandon yourself? Qin Mu lay on the pillow and laughed softly. Then she reached out and hugged Qin Chen's neck. Her voice was very soft. Brother, do you want me to rescue you? Qin Chen stared at her, and Qin Mu blinked at him. In an instant, Qin Chen was blinked. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.